Welcome to the Blogging and SEO Show. I'm Michaela, a stay-at-home mom of 3 who just happens to be in love with everything related to SEO, blogging, marketing, coffee, and shedding light into the many mystifying corners of search engine optimization, and what that means for us service providers, small business owners, and even bloggers. We're ditching the do-it-all narrative surrounding SEO and blogging and just sitting down and crafting strategies that are sustainable but still get us those first-page, long-lasting results. Now let's get cozy, grab your fave sweater and a cup of tea or coffee, and let's talk everything blogging and SEO. Hello, it's me again. Welcome back to the Blogging and SEO Show, and today's topic is going to be one that I touch on a lot, but I feel like I've never really done a deep dive on it, even if I never shut up about it. So we're going to talk about how to structure your blog post, whatever style of blog post that you're doing. Now it'll vary a little bit based on like how many headers or subheaders or paragraphs that you have based on, the content you're writing, but everything kind of follows the same structure, and it's for good reason. Structure not only impacts your SEO and how Google and other search engines crawl your website, but it also impacts how people read it, what people believe are the most important aspects of the post, what people skim and grab from the post, also just how your content flows, how it makes sense to readers, because I really hate to break it to you that a blog post that's just a bunch of paragraphs or long sentences with no headers does not compute very well to the human brain or to our eyes. But neither does a blog post that has a huge amount of headers. It doesn't make sense to us because that's not how we're consuming the content, and how our brain makes sense of what we're reading. But anyways, so yes, this does include a little bit of keyword placement too, because obviously this is the blogging and SEO show. So SEO and keywords kind of go hand in hand, obviously. And I'll touch a little bit on how your content flows, because it's not just, structure doesn't just cover headers and how your stuff looks visually, but also the flow of the content that you're adding in there, because that also has to make sense for people to enjoy it and to actually walk away believing that they gathered some type of information, whether that's learning how to do something, finding a new tool, or wanting to work with you, because yes, that is a type of educational content. It's explaining why or what your business can do for another and why that now might be that time. It's not always purely sales. We are educating in that sense, which, by the way, if you do content like this where it's also thinking about how people are consuming your content, I am a speaker along with Lauren Dewey of Entrepreneur Academic from the Creative Copilot, and that will be later on in March. So if you want to grab tickets to that, it will be linked in the bio below. It is pre-sale tickets from now until February 28th, which is really nice. So after that, tickets will go up to full price. But that is kind of the theme of mine and Lauren's chat, and I'm really excited. We did an episode not too long ago, so we're gonna go even further into that and cover some misconceptions. So I'm very excited about that. Like I said, it's in the show notes. All right, so back to the structure stuff. So let's talk about the basics or your outline, because I always recommend that even if you're not gonna fill in what's covered in each one, I always like to say start with an outline or a summary of an outline. You kind of know what's coming where or what's going where. If you're repurposing from a podcast episode or another piece of content, still try and bring a structure based on the content of your show. And if you are doing what I call a blurb, you still need a structure there too. So don't skip it just because you think it's not long enough. No, you still that. It still helps, I promise, and we'll get into that. So the first thing that you're going to think about is your headers. And by this point, you should, if you're doing it for SEO purposes, I always recommend doing the keywords research before you go into structuring. That way you can put it into your headers, or at least where it makes sense. Make sure that you mention it in your H1, your header, your title, and you should only have one H1 on your entire blog post. You should never have multiple ones, because there should only be one main topic for your post, and that's what your H1 is. So after that, then you're going to focus on your H2s, your header twos. So that's like your second biggest headers in your blog post. And it should really kind of break down your content or give an overview of the different things in your content that you're going to mention. So, if I'm doing an ultimate guide on what is SEO. So my title might be what is SEO or SEO for creative service providers, because that's obviously most of my audience. You're likely a creative service provider. And if you're not, you're still more than welcome here. I love you. But I want to make sure that when I go to my H2s, then I'm going to break it down even further, because there are multiple things of SEO and what is SEO that I'm going to cover that won't fit into just one intro paragraph, because I don't want it to just be one intro paragraph. It was just going to be that, then I probably wouldn't make it a blog post. But so I make sure that I have my little blurb, my intro blurb, and then my next header might be, what is search engine optimization, or why is it important, or, search engine optimization explained, or SEO explained, or is SEO different for creative service providers, or how is SEO different for creative service providers? So there are multiple different things that I may cover in the post that don't make sense to put all together. And when you add these H2s, it makes more sense for your reader, so that they know what this section is going to be about and more related to that, and more, and so that they know what this section is going to be about and how it kind of relates to the entirety of the content. But it also helps with your user experience, because people can skim and find exactly what they're looking for. And then when they find it and they're like, wow, this was actually really helpful, or this is really valuable, that can help your SEO, because they're less likely to just click out of your post. And it kind of builds more trust with, the reader and you, because now you've given them a valuable piece of information. It worked. It was exactly what they're looking for. And so now when they are looking for similar information, they're more likely to go to you, or if they see you in search, to click on you, even if you are not the first one who shows up. So after your H2s, then you can use your H3. So this is like supporting to your H2s, and you have a bit more freedom in like how you structure or write out your H3s versus your H2s. I like to use H3s to create my list. I do it on occasion, but I don't normally list out things as H2s. So say I'm writing a post about my 10 favorite tools that I use, for SEO. So instead of going straight into, okay, these, my first tool, number one, Moz, being an H2, I would actually make an H2 that says, okay, kind of restates my intro, and it would just instead of covering a specific tool, it would share my qualifications for the tool, stuff I require the tools to do, or how they help me in SEO, or just restate why they're on this list, or that I trust them, or that why I trust them, and just kind of give a transition from that introduction into my actual list. And I've noticed that does tend to perform better in ranking, especially when compared to if someone else is already ranking for that spot, if they only have a straight up H2 number one, just because it gives both the reader and Google a bit more context about what I'm writing about. But like I said, there's always exceptions to the rule. I'm just giving best practices here. I think before, but I do that for steps too. So step 1, step 2 of any processes. If there's a checklist, that's also another good chance to use an H3, and make sure that you have an H2 introducing those H3s. So it just kind of makes it a little bit more connected and brings attention to those as well as H2s, and makes it just a little bit more readable for users. After your H3s, you do have your paragraphs, but you have your paragraphs throughout your blog post. It's not just paragraphs after your header 3s. But you don't want your paragraphs to be like super, super bulky. I normally keep a rule of thumb that if I'm writing 4 paragraphs, if it goes past 4 paragraphs, it likely needs to be another header. If I'm finding that, I'm creating more than 2 headers and they are really closely aligned, maybe it should be another blog post that I could backlink this section to. So you don't want it to be super overwhelming, and your paragraph should be rather short. We're not writing a book. And unless you're writing for a really educational, formal audience, normally you're going to keep your paragraphs pretty short. So 1 to 3 sentences, occasionally 4 to 5. If it makes sense, just make it make sense. That's my best tip there. Just make it make sense, because most people are not thinking that they're going to spend a lot of time on this blog post or on this section, and they want to consume the content pretty quickly versus other types of content, and even other types of written content, long form written content. Okay, so before we move past this little short piece of structure, I just want to remind you, please do not put an H2, so your header 2, and then immediately after put in header 3. Give it some type of transition there. Give it maybe even a small transition. And the same with bullet points, just because it can be kind of abrupt to the eye. There are other types of ways to emphasize text than adding a header. And you have to, so on the back end of things, when you do a header, you are doing a different type of text tag. You are telling anything that's looking at code that this is a header and more important than the rest. And technically any type of change that you make to the text is going to change the way the text is coded, but it's a little bit more than, say, if you emphasize it using bold or italicize it or underline it. You can still emphasize text in other ways without making it a header. So just remember that you can emphasize. You don't have to make it an entire thing. And so normally if you're going to make a bullet point list, oftentimes it just needs a bold or an underline to emphasize it than an entire header. And if you are using a header and then a bullet point, try and give some kind of transition there to help explain what those bullet points are versus just the header, if that makes sense. All right, so moving on to the content portion. Like I said, the main thing here is you want your content to make sense. And I mentioned a little bit earlier that, if you find yourself going on and on about one aspect and it doesn't make sense to break it up, or, it feels like it can't be encompassed entirely into the blog post, make another blog post and backlink from your paragraph to it. Sometimes it can be distracting from the main purpose of your post. And instead of being information that's necessary to know to understand the full concept of the post, it becomes just distracting to the reader, either because it doesn't actually hold as much relevance to somebody, reading the post and trying to get to the main point, or they already know it because the person you're writing to already has that basic knowledge and doesn't need to consume it. So those are both different things to consider for your content, because you have to remember that when you're writing, you are writing for a specific person. And you have to not underestimate what they know, but not also overestimate what they know. It's a very good balance, because they are likely not the expert that you are. So there are parts that you're going to have to educate more or explain more, but you also can't assume that all of your audience who looks this up knows nothing. And that really does go into the flow of your content and your user experience. For example, for someone listening to this episode, how to structure a blog post is probably familiar with what a blog post is. So I don't really have to cover that topic. So even if I was writing a blog post and about how to structure a blog post, I probably wouldn't, if I mentioned it, it'd probably be a sentence and I would link back to another blog post that explained it more in depth. But I likely wouldn't have an entire section dedicated to what is a blog post. I might have one dedicated to SEO and how SEO goes into it, because not every blog post writer knows about or considers SEO or is familiar with SEO when they come to structure a blog post. Some people don't write blog posts for SEO at all. Some people just write them to have them as resources on their website, which is perfectly fine. Although I always say, if you're going through the effort of writing it, you might as well optimize it. Maybe not write with SEO in mind, but might as well optimize it afterwards. So, but that's my 2 cents. But you just have to remember who your reader is going to be, who your audience is, and what they're going to look for in that content to make sure you're writing it for them. All right. So my last little bit here, my anything else, that's what it says in my notes. It's Anything else? Because yes, I did have a little bit of left over, but it's kind of funny because you'll find this in older blog posts. And I see a lot of podcasters kind of do this too when they take their show notes and bring it over to their blog post so that, they have that information on multiple platforms. But using your titles or your header with that is I don't know, descriptive, but not descriptive as in what's included in the content, but descriptive in the fact that it is content. So for example, when you're writing a blurb about your podcast and you brought it over to your blog post and you brought it over to your website through a blog post. And so your first header is, this episode covers. Okay, that makes sense if someone was expecting to listen to the show. But likely if they found you through Google, and I'm speaking on SEO here, if they found you through Google, they probably didn't realize that they were coming to listen to an episode. They just knew they had a question, they Googled it, and you showed up as the answer. So in this episode doesn't make as much sense to them or to Google, even though they'll likely see the podcast embed, but bear with me here. Also, H2s tell Google what your website is, like what that piece of content is about. So even though you may be using your targeted keyword in your title, and you may mention it in your introduction paragraph, if you're not using it in your headers as well, it won't give the same signals. Like it doesn't say that, oh, by the way, the rest of the content is also about this keyword or this topic. It actually doesn't tell much at all. And then normally it's followed up with like a resources section. Resources about what? What is the context there? So give context, give explanations in those headers. Also, like try not to end your your blog post with "in conclusion" as your final header. You can get so much more creative and potentially even integrate your keyword back in there one more time, or a variation of it, or some type of action in there too, versus just "in conclusion." I mean, even like just say like the quick summary about XYZ is, and then your little paragraph finalizing, and then, your little CTA at the bottom. So just keep that in mind when you're mapping out your post. It can be really helpful. But anyways, that's the end of today's episode. I feel like that was a short and sweet one. And hopefully it gave you a little bit more insight about structuring that post, because sometimes it's not necessarily our content that is holding us back, because we can be like pro content writers and our content is super good and we know that people will love it and it's very useful, it's valuable, but our structure and our strategy are the things that are holding us back, and you don't know what you don't know. So hopefully this helped. By the way, if you're a podcaster and you're listening to this today, I would love to invite you into the Pod to Blog program. You can officially save your seat. It is currently in beta, so you would become one of the beta members. It is a 12-week group program. We are going to be walking through, picking your episodes, doing the research, finding your reader intentions that we can match, what your purpose for this repurposing even is, if you just want more content or you need more conversions, you want more listeners. So we're diving into that. We also have a week dedicated to keyword research that we also bring back towards the end of the program for our full content plan, because yes, we're going to sit down and map out a content plan so that you have actions to take even after the program is over, and reading your analytics so that you can make data-informed decisions, as well as 3 weeks dedicated to writing. Not in that order though, but the full page is linked down below. I would love to see you in there, and thank you for listening to today's episode, and that's it. Bye. As always, I hope you were able to learn at least one new thing today and how you can apply it to your own business or blog. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Blogging and SEO Show. Don't forget to hit follow so you don't miss the next episode. I promise it's a goodie. And check the show notes for everything we talked about today. And come connect with me on Instagram at comamama.co. If you have any questions or thoughts you want to share, DM me. Let's chat. Until next time, talk soon.